Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Hello and welcome to episode 12 of the podcast. If you're listening to this when it comes out, we're kind of right here at the end of summer. If you're in the South, kids are probably going back to school this week, or maybe it was last week. For those of us up north, we still have a couple weeks left, but in children's and student ministry, this surely is a time of transition, and hopefully you got some rest this summer. I sure did, and you're running hard as you get ready for the fall. Today we have an interview with Rob Cizek. Rob is an executive pastor at NorthShore Christian Church, and I've known Rob through the Orange Conference because Rob goes to the Orange Conference every year as an executive pastor, which is pretty cool. I know many of you are probably wishing your pastor or leader, executive pastor, went to whatever the conference is that you go to because they could understand your world more. And Rob does that. And so it was a really good conversation with Rob. We talk about leading up as an executive pastor. He's the first one on the podcast who's not, a children's ministry leader or a student ministry leader or a next gen pastor. And so we talk with Rob about how do we lead up? How do we serve our leaders well? How do we influence them? How do we, gain influence to be able to maybe champion the things that we feel like need to be championed and kind of get them to help us as well. So there's a lot there, and Rob gives us just a bunch of really helpful steps to do that. Before we jump into that interview, I just want to highlight a review that was left on iTunes from Christian J. Christian said he's been a next-gen pastor for less than a year now, and so this podcast has been really helpful. I find that this new role of next-gen pastor or family pastor, it's a staff position where you're responsible for basically preschool all the way through high school, sometimes even college, usually leading staff directors at that level. So it's typically a position with churches that are close to 1,000 in attendance or larger. It seems new. It's very new, but it seems to be growing rapidly. And if you gather a bunch of leaders in that role, it seems like they have 50 different job descriptions, even though they're titles, at least 50 different job titles, but they're all the same thing. But the other thing you see is that half the room or more has done it for less than 2 years because it's so new. So that's cool, Christian, that you're in this role now. I wish you a lot of luck. Those of us that have been doing it for a long time, we've messed up all kinds of stuff, hopefully that you can learn from. And we've had some next-gen pastors on the podcast. Cindy Fiala comes to mind, Kevin Monahan. Those are two great episodes from some next-gen pastors. And we'll have more as well. And I love that role personally because I just love being involved in children's ministry and student ministry. I love both of those ministries. I know some people really like one and maybe not the other, could never imagine serving in the other. I happen to like both, and it's a lot of fun. And people like Rob, who we talked to today, have the kind of leadership experience and principles and practices that I think are helpful for any role. And so whatever role you're in, this podcast, I hope, will be helpful to you, to help you lead up, to help you work with whoever leads you. As usual, you can find the show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 12. Let's go ahead and jump into the interview with Rob Cizek. Rob, it's great to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you, Nick. It's just an honor to be here.
Rob, tell us a little bit about yourself and your church.
Well, we're a church in the beautiful city of Seattle, actually just a few minutes north of town in the city of Everett, where they build the giant Boeing airplanes. And we're a church of about 1,500 on the weekend, and we're also a Christian school with 1,000 students. So we're a place that goes 7 days a week. There's a lot of energy. There's an awful lot of kids. Our church prioritizes its children's efforts to a great degree between an Awana program, children's ministry program, and of course the school and student ministry. So we are all in when it comes to kids. We're an Orange church. We host the Orange Tour when it comes to the Seattle area, and of course you can find my folks and me out at the Orange Conference in April, which is where we ultimately had a chance to connect, which was neat. So we are a church that is all in on family ministry.
And you're the executive pastor, right? So you're kind of like our first executive pastor on here. I know Jim Wyman was actually on a previous podcast, and Jim has served in that role, but you're the first one that's not a children's pastor, a student pastor, working somewhere in that world. So you're a special company right now. I just want you to know that. But
I am honored. I am honored.
And we're honored to have you, because I think a lot of leaders heard you just say, hey, you went to a family ministry conference with your team, and I know you go all the time, which is pretty cool. So we really value your input on this. And what we're going to talk about is, how do we, as children's pastors, student pastors, next gen pastors, whatever, work best with leadership? So, because we're all accountable to someone. It might be an executive pastor like yourself. It might be a lead pastor, but either way, how do we have that relationship, make it a good relationship, work well in that? Like, where do we start? How can you help us with that?
Sure. Yeah. Really important topic. Everybody has a boss. I have a boss. I have been working with bosses, for like you have for all of your career. And I think a great place to start a conversation about working with the boss is with the boss as a person. So your first thought, if you want to get along well with your boss, is that a Stephen Covey wisdom: seek first to understand before being understood. And that's really important, because we kind of get in our own little worlds. We have, particularly when you're working in ministry, if you're in children's ministry, your whole world is just children's, or if you're in student ministry, your whole world is just students, and you kind of get used to that whole environment down there. But your boss works in an entirely different environment, and they're also how they're wired. Think about, before you approach your relationship with your boss, do what you do naturally in some of your other relationships, and that is to say, how's this person wired? And if you're working with a senior pastor, realize that most senior pastors are wired as teachers. They're wired as shepherds. Many times they have the gift of leadership, so they're drivers. And a lot of times what they're not, people with that gift set, sometimes they may not be detailed person. And then if you think of your typical executive pastor, a lot of times executive pastors come out of the business world, or at least a business gifting. So they're much more detail oriented. They're more into budgets and writing the policies and executing the plan. So they may be a little bit more towards the management side of things. So when you're talking you can't lump senior church leadership, all in the same. You can't paint it with the same broad brush stroke. So understand the wiring of the boss or bosses that you have above you, and how that contrasts with your own wiring. And that really creates a lot of understanding and creates a great basis for your interactions.
And that takes time, right? I mean, to get to know them, to really, I feel like I've been at the same church for 10 years, same pastor, same boss. And I still feel like I learn more and more. And I'm still sure that's true of other people with me. That it takes some time, right, and effort to really understand them and how they think and what they prioritize and all that.
It does. But I'd say, even if I've been here at my church about the same time, and I'm continuing to learn new things about my bosses. But I can tell you that going in, when I was very first starting the job, I really tried to get a sense for who the people were in general, because remember, things like DISCs tests and strengths finders, people tend to fall into a few predictable categories, and many times bosses, particularly senior church leadership, falls into those categories. So go and if you're just really new to a job, new to a church, go look at the bios on the website and read about what they're interested in, and kind of just begin to draw a mental picture of, if that person, enjoys that kind of hobby, well, what can I infer from that? What might that tell me about that person and how I might approach them initially? It does take a while, and you've got to have your ear to the ground, but I think you can also, it just helps initially when you're establishing that relationship. Don't go in thinking, well, this is all about me and my ministry needs. I got to think about who I'm talking to and how they're wired, and make the stories, make what you're sharing fit. If you have a senior pastor who is a shepherd, or you have a pretty good clue is a shepherd, you can start off that relationship by talking about some of the shepherding experiences that you're having in your ministry area. And you know that your boss is going to resonate with that, as opposed to maybe going into a shepherd boss and, first talking about the budget.
Yeah, breaking out the spreadsheet. Yeah, so I know one phrase we've tried to use a lot more on our whole staff team is help me understand. Because sometimes what happens is, and this doesn't have to be with the boss, but even a coworker, you clearly aren't on the same page about something, you disagree or whatever, but you're not quite sure why, the other person is. Yeah. And depending on their personality, some people are very direct. So you're going to know like, oh, this is what I think and this is why. Others maybe not so. And so we try to use that phrase, help me understand, because it's so much better than, well, I don't get, or why, or what. Like those sound like, I don't know, critical questions versus help me understand is a little bit of a posture of learning, right?
Yeah, that is a great tool. I mean, that really is a great tool. And I don't know about you, Nick, but from what I see out there, most conflicts on a church staff tend to come from different gifting and different wiring. And that shouldn't surprise us. Scripture tells us that we are all different parts of the same body, and yet we get surprised when the eyeball sees things differently than the hand does.
Yeah, definitely. And then we, like you're saying, we don't even try to see it from their perspective. So that's good. And then another thing you would say is you got to build trust. Like if you're going to work well with leadership, you got to build trust. So how do we build trust?
Well, building trust isn't as complicated as it sounds. Really what it is, it's really as simple as saying, this is what I'm going to do, and going and doing it. That's really how people build trust. There's a few other things that we can do besides just simply delivering on what we say we're going to deliver on, and that is to have a no surprises policy with your boss.
That's good. That's good.
Man, bosses.
Yeah, they don't like to be surprised, right? Who does? I mean,
no, they really don't. And that can be as simple. The way I do that with my boss is if I see him walking down the hall and I know he's got just a quick second, say, hey man, I just want to give you a quick heads up. This is going on. And they tend to be so appreciative because stuff gets to them one way or another. And if they can hear it briefly from me, just as a friendly heads up, it's so appreciative, and it really does build a lot of trust. Another thing you can do is shoot them an email. If you know you're not going to see them for a little bit, hey man, just a heads up, want to let you know what's going on. Do that several times over a few months, and your trust is going to go way up with your boss.
I know. Just to say something in there, like what you're talking about, a good example. Like many pastors, our pastor's off day is Saturday and Monday, but he would much rather have you text or call him on Saturday if there was something that he needed to know heading into Sunday services, because what you don't want is like what you're saying, so-and-so in the church has something going on. Somebody on staff knows about it. Their assumption as somebody in the church is now the whole staff knows, especially the pastor. They know. It's depending on the church size. I mean, if the church is really large, they may not think that, but depending on your church size, even 1,500 where you are, they probably think, oh, sure, he knows. So then they approach him, and that's an awkward place to be. Like they're talking to the pastor, like they know what's going on, and meanwhile they have no idea what's going on, right?
Oh, you bet. And the same thing happens in family ministry. Think about the volunteers who give you a heads up about a family situation or something going on with a kid. And then you see the parent after services, and you're able to, not be blindsided by something that's going on in that kid's life.
Yeah, that's good. That builds trust between you and whoever that is that told you, just like for us and our leaders. That's good.
Sure. Another thing you can do with your boss is make sure that you develop a ministry plan. Some churches are really good about saying every year we're going to sit down at this time and we're going to create a ministry plan. And other churches are more laissez-faire, especially when it comes to, I think, family and student ministries. So I think a good idea is just to once a year sit down with your boss. If he doesn't initiate the conversation with you, you initiate the conversation and say, listen, hey, this is how I'm seeing the ministry year. These are the events that we're planning. These are the results that we expect to get from those events. And your boss can go, wow, all right, they're being proactive. They're planning out their year. And then you've got a basis to go back and have a conversation later with them to say, hey, I told you we were going to be doing this retreat with the high school students. Well, this weekend we did it. We had this kind of turnout. We had, this amount of spiritual growth going on. When somebody who supervises you hears you doing that, man, your stock, your trust level, it skyrockets.
That's good. Yeah, because it shows, I guess, you can think on your own, lead on your own, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
Yeah, yeah. And your boss is like, man, I don't need to worry about that person. They've got it going on. Another thing to think about in our work lives with our boss is not being a silo. It is so easy, as you know, just to say, okay, I got my thing, I got my world. I'm plenty busy doing ministry in this area. The thought of reaching across the aisle and talking to somebody in adult ministry or in a caring ministry, or even if you're in student ministry, even reaching back to children's ministry, that I don't have time for that. But remember that your boss is responsible for the spiritual growth and development of the entire church. And anybody that your boss sees as an ally in growing the entire church spiritually you're gonna build a lot of credibility with them. So take that extra effort to pull your head up from your ministry area once a month, look around the broader landscape of the church, and just say, hey, who can I help build bridges with? Who can I do a missions project with our missions team instead of my buddy? Can I if I'm doing a fundraiser this Christmas time for something, can I coordinate that with adult church? You're going to build a lot of credibility with your boss doing that.
So yeah, sometimes, and let me jump in here for a second, because that's probably true that we oftentimes feel like, I'm trying to think now from the perspective of, say, a children's pastor or a student pastor who wants something from their pastor or executive pastor. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's a push or promotion or some kind of vision casting for their ministry from the stage, or support with something behind the scenes. And isn't there this temptation to think, oh, they don't value our ministry because mm-hmm. they're not giving it the time that I think they should give to it. Mm-hmm. But give us the other side of it. I mean, you kind of said it. There's a lot they have to be responsible for. And I just think we have no idea how much, really, honestly, they have to be responsible for, so that it's not as simple as, oh, they just don't value it. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, I think that is a really, really common dynamic within family ministries. I think it's really easy to feel that the boss doesn't support you because, you know what you need. Volunteers are, a continual need. Publicity for certain events that you have, that's really a top priority for you. And it's really easy just to sort of see yourself looking at the boss going, yeah, well, that's the gatekeeper. And, they don't want to make a big deal from this, from the platform for, they don't, therefore they don't support me. Well, that's just not the case. If you feel this way about one ministry, the boss feels it about 10.
That's good. That's true. And so maybe that gives us a little perspective on why he could still value it, but not spend this kind of time on it, we think. Right. Because in a week, you may only have time for 2 or 3, and there's 10.
Exactly. And it's not a diss on you or your ministry. It's just the reality that the church has many ministries all competing for that platform time or that bulletin space. But you see, this is where the genius of collaborating with other ministries is, because if you go to them and say, hey, listen, we're going to be doing this day of service. Our student ministry is going to be doing this day of service, but we're coordinating it with the adult discipleship department. And it's going to be a big deal for, a lot of people in our church. What do you think your chances of the boss actually mentioning that are?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Because now
they're really pretty good.
Yeah, they get to use the same time and promote and support 2 or 3 things. That's good.
Sure. So there's a little enlightened self-interest there in partnering with other ministries.
That's good. There always is. But at the same time, like you're saying, genuinely want to help them too. That's good. It all works out for everyone.
Yeah. Another thing we can do for our boss is we can give them 100% of our support publicly. We really should only be saying positive things about the boss and about the church when we're out in, whether it's, out in public at the store or at your kid's school or within the church. And I know a lot of people will be like, well, that's disingenuous. That's, apple polishing or, and no, that's really not what I'm saying to do. You should if you have a disagreement with your boss or with something that's going on at the church, you really should say something about it, but you do it behind closed doors. So disagree with your boss behind closed doors. But it's one of those things where if you don't have something nice to say about your church, don't say it at all. It's just it's basic. And I love what Andy Stanley had to say about it. He said public loyalty creates private leverage.
Yeah, that's good.
And I'll tell you, that's one that if you want something to, get you and your boss working well together, better together next week, start doing that.
Yeah. And I sometimes, like you said, it's not being fake. It may just be saying nothing at all. Right.
Yeah.
That happened to me a couple months ago. This is rarely happens. I'm very fortunate because our pastor, we have a great relationship. Obviously, we've been working together for 10 years. And this was just a case where we hadn't talked about something yet. And he didn't know. He couldn't remember if we'd talked about it yet because it had been a few months removed. And then in an all-staff meeting, he mentioned one of his thoughts about it. And you know how that works. The rest of the family ministry team's thinking, are we really doing that? Is that a decision? Because and from my perspective and their perspective, it would be pretty significant. We would disagree. So, but you know what I did in the meeting? Nothing. Right? It's not like, oh, I'm not saying, we're going to talk about that now. And it's great. We talk about it later. It's exactly what you're talking about. And then it's a good example too of it's one of those things where you're just managing a tension between what the whole church needs and what family ministry needs. And if either one wins, the other one loses. So you're just trying to balance it. It was one of those kind of things. But so they do come up. They probably do come up often. There's opportunities to support, like you're saying, public loyalty, and then have that leverage privately. That's good.
I think something else you can do to help yourself out with the boss is a lot of times it's just sort of human nature for us to want to bring our problems to our boss.
Yes.
What works a lot.
We all do it, don't we? I mean, unless eventually until you get to the point where we learn to do it differently. But we all want. It's nice if somebody else can just solve our problems for us. That's easy.
It is, but what really helps a relationship with the boss is when you bring your problem, but you also bring a solution, or maybe a couple of options for a solution.
Yeah,
and you're really doing your boss a favor and yourself a favor by doing that, because then you can come in and say, "Listen, man, I'm dealing with this situation, and these are some of the things that I'm thinking about to fix it. Would you be all right if I pursued this? Or what do you think of these choices?" Man, that helps so much because one, it doesn't require your boss to have to stop on the spot and try to think through everything. Remember, your boss wants to do right by you. Your boss wants to help you, but your boss has a limited capacity to think through things, and your boss doesn't live in your area. You live in your area, and you can focus on it full time. So when you come and you say, "Man, I've got this issue in children's ministry, and these are 3 things that I can do about it. These are what I'm considering doing about it. What do you think?" And now you're including your boss. They can share with you any wisdom from their background and their experience, and it shows you as a leader, not just somebody who's coming to dump their problems and just to complain and move on. So come with solutions.
Yeah, that's good. And I would think too, leaders, executive pastors, whoever, all want leaders on their team, right? And leaders bring solutions, right? I mean, it seems like if you're just bringing the problem, you're not really leading. But I would also say, I feel like sometimes we all fall in that trap, and it's not because we're not leaders. We're just not. We're either thinking, you know what, they want to weigh in on this, right? And we just confuse, they do want to weigh in on it, but on the solution options, not let me help you start from scratch, kind of figure this out. Yeah. And so I think that's the easy trap to fall into. So all of that helps us build trust, which obviously helps that relationship. And then you have a bunch of great, practical, simple tips to help with that relationship as well. What are some of those?
Sure. Let me just kind of go through a few points here real quick. Stuff that you can take back and implement. One great thing about working on a great tip for working with your boss is timing, and we all know this. Not every day is the same with bosses. Bosses have good days and bad days, just like we do, and we don't know whether they're walking in the morning just having had car trouble or maybe a disagreement at home with the family, or if they're coming in after the world's greatest quiet time and they're coming in filled with the Spirit and walking 3 feet above the ground. You don't know that unless you ask. So one of the things that I do, if I know that I need to see the boss and I've got something I need to talk with them about, I'll try to get that information ahead of time. Many times you can ask the boss's assistant, "Hey, what's the read on the boss today? I got something I need to bring him, and should I do it now or maybe later in the day or maybe hold off until tomorrow. So try to if you've got something to bring to the boss, try to assess where the boss is at before you bring it.
So you mean like 15 minutes before the first service on a weekend is not the time? That's probably not. Hey, I got to talk to you about something.
I know most of our members think that's a great time to catch the senior pastor,
they do.
But it's really not.
That's true. Yeah. Our pastor, actually, you don't want to go there then. And usually you can't find him, but he's the good thing is he's great about once that first service is done, then you can catch him anytime. So anybody comes second, third, they could totally catch him before. But yeah, I could understand. I wouldn't want that either. You bring me some problem or something. Wait a minute, I'm about to go up here. My head's in a different space right now.
Yeah. And that's just being respectful. That's just putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and understanding where they are. Yeah, another thing we can do is realize that you shouldn't make the boss deal with your stuff. This is really kind of simple, but a lot of us just, and myself included, sometimes don't get this. Your boss is not your parent. So if your timesheet isn't complete, fill it out. If your desk is a mess, clean it up. If you're having conflicts with other people, reconcile them. And if you're forever unhappy in your job, get a different job. Okay. This is little stuff, and nothing kills your credibility with the boss more than the boss having to come and nag you for stuff that really is your stuff.
Yeah, that's like having a problem, not having an employee, or you know what I mean? It just creates more work. Just creates more work for the boss. That's the last thing you want.
Yeah, and I think, and I don't know what it is, but I just see sometimes employees, they wait for you to nudge them to do something that they know they should be doing anyway, and that's really frustrating.
Yeah, definitely. And we know it too. It's funny. We'll know it. It's frustrating to us, and then we forget it and we do it to somebody else.
Yeah. Just communication. This is really simple, but it has everything to do with long-lasting relationships with the boss. You can have some formal communication, such as meeting reports and emails that you send either to the boss or maybe to your ministry or even to the church staff, and that's just keeping them informed of the things that they really need to know about, and that's more of your formal communication. But the informal communication is really important too. And those tend to be the hallway conversations or those conversations you might have on a car ride or at a staff social event or while you're waiting for a meeting to begin. Great things that you can talk about in these, in both formal and informal settings. Share some success stories with your ministry. You know them, the people around you know them. You may even take them for granted, but your boss probably doesn't know them. And remember, your boss is always looking for success stories. I know I am. I love bragging on my team. I love knowing the good stuff that's around them. And I'm kind of in the middle of the management pile. So many times I'm giving reports at board meetings, or I'm giving reports to my senior pastor about what's going on in the organization. And one of my favorite things is when one of our ministry leaders will go, hey, we had so many people come to Christ last weekend, or we had a baptism last weekend where our one of our volunteer leaders did the baptism, or we had a situation where somebody was in financial straits, and a group of people in my ministry area pulled together to help them out. These are great stories that your boss, really loves to hear. They encourage the boss, and then the boss can turn around and encourage the people above them with great stories about you and your ministry. Another thing that we can do is this is really simple, but please get this, okay? If somebody sends you an email, whether it's the boss or anybody else, we just simply hit reply as soon as you need it, as soon as you read it, and say, hey, great, go for it. Or, hey, I got it, I'll take care of it this week. Or, hey, I can't get to that this minute, but I should be able to get to it on Monday. Please don't not reply to emails. Just do it right away. It doesn't have to be 2-page response. Just let them know that when they sent you an email that you're responsive to it. And then be prepared when you come into a meeting. It's really obvious as to whether you've prepared to be in that meeting. You value the boss's time and you value your time simply by showing up and being prepared. Basic stuff, but they're the building blocks of a good relationship with a boss.
Yeah, like you said earlier, building trust seems like this, I don't know, hard to clarify thing. What do you actually do? But you said it's really simple. You just do what you say you're going to do. So being prepared, showing up on time, replying to an email like, yes, I got it, I'll do that, or whatever. They're all just doing what you said you're going to do, right?
Yeah, I'm just surprised by how many people don't do this, particularly the on-time thing. And guys, I'm going to tell you how a boss thinks, or at least an executive pastor thinks. Here's what I see if I have a large meeting and somebody's late to it. This is what I see. I see the hourly wage of everybody sitting at that table waiting for somebody else. All right.
Oh,
so
that's good. Yeah, I really thought about that.
I may have cumulatively several $100s an hour of church compensation sitting in that large meeting, and that meeting gets held up for 15 minutes by somebody. There's a dollar cost to that, and you have now cost me potentially hundreds of dollars in compensation by you not being there. So I know most people don't think that way, but I literally see dollar signs above people's heads in a meeting when we're sitting there sort of vamping and talking about whatever until certain people show up.
That's good. I don't think most people think that. Like I've never thought about it that way. There's also a principle in there that is true that you might think of more though, and it's that, which is helpful because we all know how it works. Some people, they're just always on time. We have a meeting code. It's like we call it the big 3+1, and the +1 is be on time, which means be early and be prepared. So it's basically the things you said. But and all of us know some of it is a personality type, and there's different reasons within that. But I think what we don't see, and you kind of got it there in the principle about money, but it's also true of time. It's being late doesn't just impact you; it impacts others. So you're talking about that from a financial standpoint, but it's also true from a time standpoint, right? Like all of a sudden now and there are valid reasons, so we're not talking about that. But my time is more important than your time. When I show up late, that's what it communicates. Like what I'm doing is more important. Yeah. And we don't think of it that way, though. We just really think of it like, I tried. It's intentions. Like I wanted to be there on time, but all that.
Yeah, well, that's nice. But, there's a lot of people in the room who made an effort to be in the front door of the building at the start time today. And if you rob them of 15 minutes of their productivity, it really is not you've essentially said all that effort that person came to did to make sure that they were on time is out the door, and you've robbed them of 15 minutes of productivity or things that they should be doing themselves. So it's a financial stewardship issue for the church. It's a personal time and energy stewardship for the individuals in the meeting. And you're right. It's, I'm not saying we have to be, crazy about this, but when you are late, it does have an impact, and you don't win any brownie points with the boss. They know who the people are who are consistently late without a good reason, and your stock as an employee goes down.
Yeah, the trust goes down. Now, some people, their boss is that way, right? Not many. Well, I guess it depends. I don't know many executive pastors for sure that operate that way, but who knows? There could be other bosses, or it's a time thing. Sometimes maybe it's the pastor, and because of the multitude of meetings and different things. Yeah, so it kind of goes both ways, but certainly you want to build trust by doing your part, showing up early, being prepared. Now, another part that you kind of talk about as it relates to leading well and working well with our boss is just having clear expectations. Like sometimes we can have unrealistic expectations, or we don't even know what our expectations are. So what are some ways we can kind of help get that right? Sure.
Yeah, I think you probably live at peace with your job a little better if you really think through, okay, what am I expecting? Now, everything that I expect personally about my job may not necessarily be what other people around me are expecting. So we all carry things into our jobs, our own personal expectations. A lot of times, if they're unmet, then we're unhappy. But there's a couple of things that I challenge any church employee to think about. And one is simply to remember, and again, this sounds a little obvious, but I think people forget, when you work at a church, you're the minister and not the ministry, the person who's being ministered to. And I think some people really come, because I work at a church, I can take my paid hours and talk to people about my challenges or spiritual issues. And that's not true. It's the opposite. As an employee of a church, the church sees us as mature believers. And it says, we're giving this person the privilege of paid ministry. So the church is looking to you to be serving others first. It's also looking for you to be mature enough to understand that it's your responsibility to ensure that you're inspired, that you're energetic, and that you're practicing your own personal spiritual disciplines. It's not the church's role to kick you in the butt to say you need to have personal time in the Word or you need to be in prayer. It's not your church's job to get you inspired to do your job. And it's not your church's job to minister to you while you're on the clock. Now that's not to say that, some of this doesn't, go with the territory, and that there's times when you're not working and the relationships that you have at church that you can draw on for support or for spiritual guidance. But we really have to remember that it is a privilege to be paid to do ministry, and that our role when we're here during those work hours is to be serving others. Another expectation is our expectation of the boss. And many times you hear that word pastor, you think, okay, well, it's going to be like, that picture of Jesus we always see, wearing a robe and he's looking all nice and he's sitting there with a lamb and
he's got a surfer hairstyle going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's going to pick up the board and hit the waves.
Yeah. Surfer savior. Yeah. We see that and we go, well, that's what church and pastors should be like. But let's not idealize our pastors that way. There's something that I learned a long time ago, because it was a little disturbing to me, and I learned it first with CEOs, but I see the same thing going on with senior pastors, and that's this: lions need to roar. Okay, now there's just some times when I've worked with good, responsible business CEOs, and 99.5% of the time they're very cordial, they're very friendly, they're great salespeople, they're just wonderful. And then every once in a while, just out of the blue, it's raising their voice or a fist pound on the desk, or you just like, what happened there? And sometimes that'll happen in the church environment. And you go, what's going on? That surfer Jesus pastor that I had in my mind is over there pounding on the table, getting upset about something. Well, you know what that is? It's part and parcel of the gifting package. And sometimes when you're in a senior leadership position, you roar because you have that level of passion. And I'm hoping that this roaring is not immaturity. But sometimes when you just have a level of passion and a level of drive, senior leaders are very driven, take ground kind of people. And if occasionally that comes out as a raised voice or an intensity or a passion, you know what, guys? That's a lion roaring every once in a while. Be glad you got a lion in charge. As long as it's not inappropriate, just go, you know what? It's just part of the gifting. Don't let a boss who raises his voice every once in a while in passionate pursuit of the mission throw you or cause you any sort of crisis.
Yeah, and you're right, because the alternative could be not good either. That they're not a lion that roars. They're not on fire to reach people who are not a part of any church. Mm-hmm. And they're very content to not carry out that mission and just kind of do church week to week. Yeah, I certainly would not love that situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't want a milquetoast leader in there. So just don't be disillusioned by somebody who occasionally gets passionate or strong about something. As you said, Nick, it really is a blessing and not something to be worried about unless it's coming from the wrong place. Last couple of thoughts on just kind of doing well by yourself in the workplace. Start and leave your jobs well. When you're starting a ministry job, work some extra hours. You don't know the place. You don't know the players. Say to yourself, for the first month on my job, I may work 60 hours a week because I need to go to different ministry events. I need to meet different people in my ministry. I need to meet with the boss. I need to get all of my paperwork in place. There's just so much, your first few weeks on the job are not going to be all of your weeks on the job. So come on in, be first in the door, be last out the door. Show everybody around you that you have a good work ethic. Really learn the people, really learn the place. I said earlier, develop a ministry plan early on, and when you start a job, so that your boss knows where you're going with things, and you know where to be spending your energy. And then I would say the same thing, that it's worth your time to try to leave a job well. And this is hard. So many people, whether it's an ordinary, marketplace job, or whether you're in ministry, you're going to have some bumps along the way. There's going to be some unhappy times, and there's the temptation to want to just sort of, if you're thinking about leaving, oh yeah, I didn't like that, that person. I didn't like the way that happened, and it really doesn't take much of your grumping on the way out the door to change your reputation from, yeah, that was a great employee, to, yeah, I liked him when he was here, but he was just really kind of grumpy and negative towards the end, and kind of hung out with, that attracted the other grumpy, negative people. And then all of a sudden people forget about all those years of all the great work you did, and just sort of remember the grumping you did on the way out. The other thing is, besides being positive and speaking well on the way out, try to take care of those things that are in your ministry that need to be taken care of, that are either going to get taken care of by you, or they're going to get taken care of by the next person. Don't leave it to the next person. Just show everybody, hey, I know that this is a problem, and I'm just going to do the heavy lifting myself on the way out the door. Is it a little bit of discomfort for you? Yeah, but think about what you're saving the new person. If a new person has to come in and let somebody go who you just have known has needed to be let go for the last 2 years, take care of that. Take care of problems with volunteers, take care of supply problems, or, whatever it is you got. Take care of it so the new person coming in the door doesn't have to deal with it. And remember how enthusiastic we were when we started our job. Remember how happy we were to get the job. Remember how turned on we were.
Oh yeah, definitely.
The church.
Like you're gonna change the world.
Yeah. Even if that's faded a little bit as you're leaving, realize it's all still there, and the person who's coming behind you has those same feelings. And our responsibility to God and our responsibility to our ministry hasn't changed just because we're short timers. So please think of that last few weeks on your job as an opportunity to do some kingdom work and to really help your church on the way out, because your contributions on the way out matter at least as much as they did on the way in. And remember, it's, this isn't just a job, it is a ministry, and it is our opportunity to make a difference in God's kingdom.
Those are good reminders.
Leave well.
Yeah.
Leave well.
Yeah. And set something. I know at my church growing up, different kind of structure. We had committees, we had a personnel committee. And when the one pastor left, they actually let go of 2 staff. And it was kind of like, even I, as a teenager, knew that wasn't working out.
Mm-hmm.
I was probably almost out of high school, so it was that obvious. And I always remembered thinking that was really smart, because you just really helped out the next person who came in with a clean slate and got to build. So we have a little bit of time left, and I wanted to hit just a couple points about how to hire well. So some people listen to this podcast, they hire other staff in family ministry, whether they're a children's pastor and hiring more people for their team, or student pastor, or maybe a next gen or family pastor. And you had a couple things that you've talked about that I'd love to just hear a little bit about. One of them is a candidate evaluation matrix. You said have a candidate evaluation matrix. What is that? What does that look like? How do you use it?
Well, it's actually part of a larger plan. Do we still have a couple of minutes that I could kind of go over the whole package?
Yeah, that would be good.
Rather
I think
than
that'd be
just
really
that
helpful.
one element.
And then if there is something that, I don't even know if there's something that you physically have, like a document or something we could share, we could put it in the show notes too. That would be helpful.
Yeah. I think I've got one around here I might be able to send you for the show notes. Definitely. Well, listen, here's I'm just going to share with you how we do it, and this comes after many processes, and we've kind of refined this over time. I'm not saying that this is what you have to do, but this is what really works well for us. When we have a posting, when we have an opening, the first thing that we do is obviously we rewrite the job description, and we write a posting for the job, and we post it internally, and we post it on the standard, church staffing, church job type website. And our hope is that, in our prayer, we pray this through, is that God will bring us the right candidates in that first pool, because that first pool is a very low cost pool for us. It's you pay for a little bit of advertising and you bring them in. A great way to help sort candidates, because a cattle call like that, sometimes you'll get 100 people who apply, and it takes a lot of time and effort to try to discern, who are the good people in this. So one way that you can really help yourself when you do something, when you're writing ads for jobs, be really specific about what you're looking for, and ask the candidates to write you in their letter how they meet that criterion. And for us, a good example for us is we had a children's minister opening, and we're an Orange church. And I really wanted to know what people's experience with Orange is, because Orange has been around long enough. It's broad enough. I know there's people out there who are familiar with it, and I just didn't want to have to recreate the wheel. We're a strong Orange church. I know that for an Orange person, this would be a great job to have. So I just really wanted to camp out on that idea of being Orange in this process. So I did exactly everything I just told you. We wrote the job description, we wrote the ad, and in the ad I wrote, in your cover letter, be specific about your experience with Orange. Well, 100 ish applicants come in, and 70% of them haven't bothered to mention Orange. So my job got really
nice.
So I simply gave very quick glance at the people who didn't mention Orange. They didn't care enough to bother to tell me about what I'm looking for, so I'm not really that interested in that.
Because it kind of tells you two things. Because on one hand, by the way, if anybody doesn't know what Orange is, they can go to whatisorange.org, I think. But it's a philosophy and a strategy we're an Orange church as well, in terms of we just buy into that. We use the curriculum, but those are two different things. You can certainly lead with the strategy and not use the curriculum. But you wanted to know who thought Orange and had experience with it and kind of was on the same track. But it also told you something if they didn't even mention it. Like maybe they did, but then they didn't mention it in the letter. That tells you didn't even read the job description or
right.
the posting that well.
Sure. You don't even care enough about my church and my opening to tell me why you're a good fit for it.
Yeah.
That really says something about your character to me.
Yep.
And it would for you two running this process. It just says something about their character and it just really helps you get to the good candidates fast. I was able to narrow our field very quickly to about 5 people, and you'll be able to do the same with your openings if you simply ask people very narrow questions that are about a value that's really important in the opening that you have. Okay, so we've now sorted it down to 5 or so candidates. Call all of them on the phone to do an initial, get your initial sense of them. You should be able to whittle it down to 2 or 3 top candidates. Bring those candidates in and create a search committee. In an interview committee would probably be a better way to put it. But this is where the matrix that you had asked about. Create a committee with 5 to 7 people on it, probably closer to 5. Get 5 people on it. Get people that you respect how they think, but make sure that you get people who don't think just like you. Your committee should be of really intelligent people who do their jobs well, but people who have different lenses, because you're going to spot, when you do these interviews, you're going to spot the stuff that's important to you. That's not going to be hard, but other people, because of their experience, see different things than you do. And I can't tell you the number of times that I've brought in people that I respect, but I know I don't necessarily think like, and they point out stuff to me that is gold. So don't just have a team of yes people around you when you're interviewing. Get people who think differently. If you're a creative, get a business guy on that committee. If you're a shepherd, get get somebody who thinks more pragmatically on there. Whatever it is that you are, make sure you've got somebody who's kind of the opposite on your team, and listen to them and see what they spot that you're missing.
Now, some churches, if I could just jump in for a second, that's a great idea, because some churches, like you're saying, they only interview within the department. So that is a problem. Some do it with, like you were saying, a committee. Just you could even get volunteers in there, right? That you really trust. Some do it just within staff, like they'll call it like cross departmental interviews or whatever. You got somebody from groups interviewing the next student pastor. Yeah, that's really good. And because I think a lot of times you're right, we miss that. We just keep it within the department or the role that they're getting hired for.
Sure. And if I'm in family ministry, I'm looking at certainly, having me as a leader on board, but I'm probably looking to bring in one or two key volunteer lay people who are in the trenches doing this job week in and week out with me to get their take on, how would they respond to this person's leadership? How would they respond to this person in general? And then I'm probably going to go to, if I'm in children's, I'm probably going to go to my student ministry and ask that person to be there or send a representative, and vice versa. And then I might go to an adult pastor of some sort, a counseling pastor or a discipleship pastor, and just bring in a different perspective. So you're really looking for a lot of different lenses in the interview. Now, to keep it from getting to be chaos, you have the matrix. And matrix is really simple. It's just a grid, and all you do is you write across the top lines of the grid the qualities that you're looking for in a person. Pick 5 or so, and then you're then along the horizontal lines you're putting the different people's names, and then once an interview is complete, you simply ask all of the people who are on the search committee to assign a number of how well that candidate fits, and you write it down in this grid, this matrix. And it really it's a nice way to objectify your search committee members' feelings as it specifically relates to the job, as it specifically relates to the task at hand. What I love about this is, I think what happens in interviews a lot of times is, I think we really respond to our affinity towards an individual. Somebody comes in and says, hey man, I love to spend my weekends fishing. Oh yeah, we really like that guy because I like to fish and they like to fish.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, well that's great. You guys like to fish, but there's a job to be done here. And there's some key components to that job. So having a matrix spelling out the key and most important things about that job, and then rating each candidate with a number, really keeps things objective. And then, when the candidate leaves the room and it's time to, bring everybody together and say, hey, what do you think? You're still talking about the job. You're not talking about the fishing. You're talking about, hey, I think, this person, when it comes to, communicating to volunteers, I gave this person a 3 because, they said this story. And somebody else will go, well, I gave them, a 5. And, somebody else might say, I gave them a 1. And then you're talking objectively about the position and the person's experience with it, and not just your own pet things, which is what I think a lot of times interviews can kind of deteriorate into.
And that's good, because also you mentioned it, but it takes some subjective things, like how do I feel about how they answer the questions, or what's my sense, and you make them a little bit more objective so you can compare them. Because it is hard to say, compare candidates 1, 2, and 3, and some things are just going to stand out, but some things it's like, I'm not quite sure, but if you force me to put a number on it, maybe then I could tell you. That's good. And you're looking at a broad list of things too, not 1 or 2 things. It's a bunch of qualities. That's helpful. Now, you also mentioned to interview the spouse. Well, I don't know. I want to cut you off if you have something else, but I thought that one stood out. That's a big one.
Sure. Well, that's what you do after the committee meets. Remember we went from our pool of candidates. Now we're down to the top 3. Well, what do you do after the interviews? You've done 3 interviews. How do you make that final decision? Well, one is use some tests, okay, and see if those tests agree with what your committee is saying. We give a spiritual inventory gifts assessment, which is kind of basic. Most people know that. We use StrengthsFinders 2.0. And you can also use DISC if you want to. And then we use Taylor Johnson. And all of these assessments, we don't do anything except look to make sure that what we're hearing in the interview is consistent with some of these inventories that are coming back. And these inventories will either confirm what your committee is saying, or they'll make you concerned because here you have some of these assessments saying one thing and you have the person presenting themselves to the committee in another way. But if the assessments match what your committee is feeling, your confidence level can go way up on the hire. Last few things to do.
Real quick, one question for you, because I think a lot of people have heard of StrengthsFinder 2.0. They can just get the book, comes with the code, you can do that. I think a lot of people have heard of DISC, maybe not, but it's been around for decades. Taylor Johnson, I feel like a lot of people don't know about that. That's more of an emotional intelligence one, right? Can you tell us just a little bit about that one and how you use it?
Sure. Taylor Johnson is more of a, I don't know how you would put it, maybe just a personality inventory. It was created by a psychologist. If you want to use it, you can search it out online. You get the test, but it has to be scored by somebody who's trained in doing it. And essentially, what it does is it will map for you. It will map for you where that person, I want to say on a continuum, it might say, is this person more likely to respond to a situation out of legalism or out of compassion? You can say that nicely, in a spiritual gifts inventory, but what you have with the Taylor Johnson is you have something that is a little bit more scientific. It's not brand new. This test has been around for a couple of decades as well. It's a very tried and true sort of baseline measurement that a lot of I found out about it through corporate world, where corporations had been using it. And what it does is it's just another maybe more scientific piece to all of the other, Strength Finders is a little subjective, spiritual gifts inventory is a little subjective. It can objectify the things that you're seeing in the other assessments better than, it's just less of a subjective inventory.
Yeah, and it sounds like...
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And I've heard really good things about it from churches too. So I've heard it from the business world, like you said, but I've also heard it from churches, and we haven't used it. So that's why, I wanted to bring it up, because I don't feel like it's as well known as some of the other ones. Now, there are like Wired That Way, Personality Plus, that are personality assessments, or, with the one with the animals, the lion, the otter, the beaver, or the colors. And so it could be in the same vein as those, but I will say, I need to check it out, because I've heard a lot of good things about Taylor Johnson specifically.
Right. And remember this whole thing about interviewing in general, and even with the tests, these aren't big, scary, there's nothing sinister about all of this, because remember, all you're trying to do is, whether you're the candidate or whether you're the church, you're simply trying to determine a good fit. All right. Nobody likes a bad fit. The last thing in the world you want to do is get hired by a church only to find out that they are terrible, or to go into a church thinking one thing and to find out that your personality clashes with the people around you. And that, you are going to waste 18 months of your life, having a bad experience, trying to find a new job. It's going to take you 18 to 24 months just to get back to where you were. And that's not good. And the thing about assessments are nothing sinister. Nobody's putting it in your permanent record, or, it's simply another way that we can assess a good fit, because everybody loves a good fit. You're going to come, you're going to love your church, you're going to love your ministry, you're going to love working with the team around you, man. And the better we are as churches in giving people those good fits, the better, our happier our employees are going to be, certainly the happier we're going to be. So if you have it, just, if you have that little, I don't know about tests, well, hey, if they really help you make good decisions, they're worth it for everybody.
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
Last few things. Interview a spouse. People forget this, but we're in ministry, and spouses are partners in that ministry, whether they're active or passive. They're very much there. And it's when you get down to that top candidate, bring the spouse out. It takes a little extra time. It's another step, maybe a little extra money, but you're really going to get a sense. Is that Scripture tells us that qualification for ministry, the home life, how a person leads at home, is the telling indicator of whether a person is qualified to lead in the church. So if you never find out what that person's family life is like at home, you're missing a real opportunity. So bring in the spouse, keep it informal. It's nothing big, nothing scary, but go out to dinner, maybe show them around the community a little bit, spend time with them in the car, just hear who they are, and ask them how, don't be shy, just at the right time, ask them, hey, ministry is something that affects marriages. Ministry has an impact at home. Have you guys talked about it? What do you say about it? Are you ready for it? Do you support this? And it'll become really clear whether the spouse is like, yeah, we're on board. We want to make that move. We're really interested in ministry. Maybe I'm interested in, if you're interviewing a high school pastor, maybe, you find out that the wife is really interested in doing ministry too, and that you can kind of look forward to her being involved in ministry. Or you find out that person's been burned by the church, and they don't mind if their spouse is out there working, but they're not interested in being part. That helps set your expectation for the relationship going forward. So interview the spouse, drive the candidates around the community, see how they feel. If they look kind of disinterested, and they see your community has a bunch of smokestacks in it, and they're interested in living in Brentwood, well, you probably don't have a fit. But just by showing them your community, engaging their interest in your town can tell you a lot. Make sure you always do at least one meal in this process with people. I can't tell you exactly what it is about breaking bread with people together, but man, people just let their hair down, and you really just sort of get a good sense of each other, over a sandwich or whatever. Check references. Okay, I know HR always nags you about checking references. This is really, really important. Again, you don't want a dead fit. So talk to the people they tell you to talk to, but then also do your homework. Call their old employers if they're not on the list. If you know somebody in that town at a different church, maybe you call them up and say, hey, did you know so-and-so over at, across the street? Find out what other people are saying about them. And then the last thing is really obvious. Don't forget to Google it. Go on there and see what this person looks like in social media. See what you can find out about them on Facebook. You don't ask anybody for their sign-ins or anything, but how do they present themselves to the world in social media? That's really important in this day and age. So
yeah, it's a great tool that we didn't used to have, and now we have, and it's really, really helpful, because a lot of times I don't think social media is ever really an accurate picture of 100% of who someone is, but you might get more of who they are than you get in an interview.
Yeah, or at least some things to ask about or to dig deeper on.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know you would agree with this too. You've kind of said this before, that when you're doing references, your goal is, one, to obviously call the references they list, but to call the places they've worked that they didn't list, right? Mm-hmm. That matters. I mean, that's always a little bit of a red flag for me if I'm looking through and they worked at 4 previous churches and 2 of them are references. I'm thinking, that's interesting. The current one makes sense if they're still there. The others, though, would be a red flag. But another thing I learned a long time ago that I think is really helpful is go multiple levels deep on the references. Who else can you tell me? Who else could I talk to that right? Or while that person was at your church, they ever have any conflict with anyone? And can I talk to them? And you might call up and feel like, well, you should have conflict. I totally agree with them. But that would just reinforce, like your belief in them as a leader. I find that gets skimped a lot. And when we had Jim Weidman on, I think it was episode 4, he and I talked a little bit about how one thing, and I'm sure you've seen this too, where candidates, like if we're looking for another job, we don't interview the church well enough. It's almost like the same, it's not references, but it's almost like the same thing where we don't do the work we need to do to figure out, like you were talking about earlier, is it a fit? And then a year later, we're not happy.
Nick, you're absolutely right about that. I wish more people would interview us at the same level that we interview them, because I really want them to be sure that they're not coming in here with rose-colored glasses. Sometimes when you apply to a larger church, you walk in there and the first thing you see are those buildings and the space and maybe the toys or the resources that you have. And it's really easy just to get carried away and go, yeah, man, I want to be part of that. Well, there's stuff that happens at bigger churches that doesn't happen at smaller churches, and you need to know that you're ready for that. And if you haven't interviewed the church, you're not going to pick up on some of those dynamics that are going to either make you happy or not. So, one of the this is you're not just when you're a candidate, you're not just looking for a job, you're hiring your boss. Okay. And you want to hire a good boss, because a good boss is going to pour into you. They're going to support you. They're going to encourage you. They're going to help make you successful, because that makes them successful. And they're going to position you for greater things in ministry down the road, as opposed to a bad boss who's just going to make your life miserable, and you're going to come home every night and complain.
Yeah. And I would imagine you could say this as the boss. You're going to hire, if somebody asks you a lot of questions, if they interview the church, you respect them more, right?
I am so much more at ease with candidates who come in with lists of things to talk about and ask us some tough questions as well, because I know that they're serious.
Yeah, that's good. Well, Rob, this has been really, really helpful. Two big topics in a way that I think we all need to wrestle with and sometimes just get overlooked, in the week-to-week ministry. So this has been really good. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Well, thanks, Nick. We don't get a chance to talk about these all that much, and I really so appreciate your heart for churches and your heart to have conversations like this, because while they might not always be the top of mind things to think about, these are the things that affect people's lives, their work lives, their by extension their spiritual and home lives. And I love to have the opportunity to talk about it. So thank you.
Thanks, Rob. I don't know how you ended up in the role you're in at your church, but I don't know if you did what we just talked about there. If you interviewed the staff there or whoever was hiring you to ask questions, almost like you were interviewing them. But if you haven't, which I think most leaders haven't, there may have been some surprises, who knows, but I think that's a really helpful tip from Rob. And so if you are in the process of maybe, moving to another church, thinking about taking on a new role at a different church, that's an action step I think you should definitely take to make sure you interview them, list out your questions. No different than when you're hiring someone and you read their references and then you hopefully ask their references for references and you continue to dig. Hopefully you do that with the church too. I just see far too many leaders who are at churches where it seemed like it was going to be good initially, and they stepped into the role, and then not even a year in, they realized this is not what I was thinking it was. This is not what I wanted it to be. There's a lot more that I didn't realize was happening. And then 2 years in, they're looking for another job again. And I hate to see that for the church and for the leader. So if that's you, be sure to interview whatever church you're talking to, dig deep, make sure it's going to fit for you. Some other action items you might want to take are to do an assessment with your team. So we talked about a number of different team assessments there. You could do one of those with your staff team, with your volunteers, maybe your core volunteers, probably not everybody, but it was maybe a leadership team, so to speak, of your volunteers. That would be really helpful. Something else you could do is pick one thing from the list that Rob gave about how to lead up and do it this week. One thing, it might be something more in line with like how to serve your leader. It might be something more in line with how to help influence them and get them to make a different kind of decision, champion something, lead in a different way, whatever that might be. Another action step will be to read one of the books we mentioned. We mentioned a few books, including some from Stephen Covey there and his son. Those are great books, and you could read one of those. I think that would be really helpful. And then last, if you are looking to hire for a role or even fill a volunteer position, you could use that matrix that Rob referenced. We'll put that and all the other links and stuff in the show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 12. So if you take some of those steps, I'd love to hear about it. You can email me at nick@nickblevins.com. I'd always love to hear from you. If you want to leave a review on iTunes and let me know about the podcast there and how it's helping you or not, or how we can improve it, you can email me. Or if you have ideas about guests we could have on the podcast, topics or questions you'd love to hear us talk about, I'd love to hear from you. And you can just email me there or hit me up on Twitter at Nick Blevins. In the next episode, we have Ben Kearns. Ben blogs at averageyouthministry.com. So if you're in student ministry, you may know Ben or you may know him through his blog. And we have a great conversation about student ministry and just different challenges there and how he's approaching that at his church. And there's also an excellent piece that Ben shares about their approach to how they disciple and lead high school seniors. And so I thought this is a great time to hear it as we're starting up a new school year. It's not too late to kind of take the ideas and principles of what he does for high school seniors and do that for high school seniors at your church as well. So you don't want to miss that in the next episode. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any episode, and we'll see you next week in the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.